All right. Hello, this is Philip at thebest3d.com, and I'm going to start a mini series on brushes. I feel like there's a lot of things to explore, not just with Howler, but also with the little brother or sister, PD Artist, and also PD Particles. This one here is PD Particles, and that's sort of an entry-level version from Project Dog Waffle. It does have fewer features, it doesn't do as many filters, but it has pretty much the same set of tools for painting. So it's really meant for painting and doing touch-up perhaps on existing photographs. And what I wanted to do is focus on, in this particular one here, to focus on how to create things that grow along a wall, such as this one here. And really, to do that, we need to create ourselves a little bit of a collection of brush images. I mean, certainly we can use the particle brushes, and they do quite a bit of magic. We can certainly use them to draw all sorts of funky stuff there. There are Joshua trees, and there's other stuff that can grow right there. But what I'll do is I'll do something a little bit more aiming at using or borrowing from Mother Nature. And that means we take a picture of something and then we'll build ourselves some brushes that use some of these leaves in this case. So let's take a look. If I'm going to go and select some of these leaves, I simply need to zoom in close enough to find one that I like. And let's see, one that's in plain view, like this one here. I'm going to grab that one. So I'm going to need to use the lasso tool in this case. Lasso to Alpha, that's the one here on the left side is my toolbar. That's something you can customize. We cover that in other tutorials. So find your lasso tool, and there it is, Lasso to Alpha. And then you simply go and select kind of a very coarse outline of that leaf. Right. Now, depending on which version or how you've configured it, it might go into a transform state. It might do all sorts of things to that. I'm going to go just leave it as is and copy that or select that. So in many cases, you might just immediately switch to that mode where you see the outside selected or non-selected appearing in sort of a pinkish color. And that depends on how you have the settings in the selection area. In PD Artist or PD Howler, it's a selection menu. Here we have a variety of options, very similar. Marching ants can be showing. Color, the overlay can be showing. And that's where you get that pink appearance there. And what I'm going to do simply is use Control C to capture that into a brush. Actually, Control V, I think. No, B. Control B should be it. Maybe not. Let's right-click here and see what other options we have. We can apply transform. So we're doing a transform to that alpha. It's not what we need, though. We just want to have that selection, right? And then at that point, we can do, I think it's Control B. There you go. So that picked it up as a brush, which means we can now go to the brush tool and paint with it. And we can stamp it down. We can make it appear in different opacity, at different levels of opacity. And more importantly, we'll store a copy of that. So let's go to the brush area and store this brush. In fact, there's a shortcut up here somewhere. Store a copy of the selection, store a copy of the custom brush. There you go. All right, so this is a stored copy of the image and some of the attributes of this brush image that we have just created. And let's go and restore the original image here and pick another one. So again, that was with the lasso tool. And I'm going to basically create a collage of several leaves, right? They could even be from 2 or 3 leaves at a time. I don't need to do any further transforms to that. I'll just want to do a Control B for brush, pick it up, and there may be a shortcut actually. If I recall, it's a shift, like the double quote. Doesn't seem to be implemented here. So I'm going to go to brush and store the selected. Again, there's a shortcut up here. That's probably a faster way to do it rather than going to the brush menu or the brush items here. You could do there it is, store brush, and so you have a second image here. Right. And in fact, really, what we may want to do is not keep each separate, because I mean, we can paint with this one, we can paint with that one, that's fine, but it would be better if we combined the two into a single brush of 2 images or even more, right? So let's get a few more before we actually combine them. Let's get perhaps one more from this area. There seem to be some flies or some snails that have eaten away at these leaves. They're a bit bright too. We might change that. We can certainly adjust the color, the hue, the saturation, the lightness, and all that, even once it's in the brush. So anyway, let's go back to the lasso and perhaps capture this area here. Get this little collection, and that's all we need to do with that. And then capture that into another custom brush. So we now have a couple of custom brushes here, right? 3. Imagine doing this perhaps until you have half a dozen or even more. What you'll want to do is collect them all into a new custom brush. So let's take one of them and then select this one by clicking it, right? So you're painting with this one if you're painting. Oh, and we can certainly clear the selection here. Oh wait, I didn't capture this yet, silly me. Nobody interrupted me. How come you guys didn't catch that? Okay, I still have, this one here is actually a copy of this one. It's the same here, so no use. But this one here, I'm going to need to do control, what's it called? Under the brush menu, there it is. Pick up selected, right? So the selection is picked up as a custom brush. There you go, now we see it. And then I can simply store that as well. But now instead of storing it, I'm actually going to add it to this one. This one's already stored. And if I look at the film strip, there's only one image in it. But I can add the one that I currently hold, this one here, my current active brush, I can add it to this. Right, so I can add a frame, and boom, now we have both of these together. Then I can do the same here. I can pick this guy, so now I'm painting with that, and I can add it to this collection again. Add frame. So now we have 3 images there in a single brush, and that's basically what we call an animated brush, because as we're painting now, if we click this and we paint with that, you can see how it's quickly going from one to the next. And so what we'll do is we'll perhaps adjust the distance that we have each of these appearing, so they're a little bit easier to distinguish. We might want to perhaps increase the step distance. There it is. Make that something like 70s-ish, something like that. So then you see that they are a little bit farther away. They're sparsed. They're a little bit more distant from each other, right? But then that way you can already start getting a bit of a sense of what we'll do with that, right? We'll paint some sort of a growth of this type going up here. And then the next trick is going to be, well, how do we make it a bit more realistic? So one thing we can do is, all right, so we're going to need a few more things here to make it more realistic. It looks flat here, right? So one thing we need to do is make it cast a shadow. Now, this is a stored copy that has a combination of 3 images. We'll be able to work with that. But I'm going to go also, let's go minimize this one here for now. Just keep it aside here. And we have this one still. The others I deleted. But let's see what happens. So with this one, as we paint with that, and let's say we increase the step distance for that as well. Right, there it is. How do we get to draw a few more, let's say shadow cast or something else here? So that's an attribute of the brush that we can apply in sort of a post effects. If you look at the settings, there it is. Under, you're on the brush tool and you go to the settings, you have the brush settings. You see there's the FX tab, and in the FX tab, you can enable a variety of effects that are sort of post-processing. And one of them is to cast a shadow. So click that shadow option and maybe give it a bit more offset and a bit more blur. But then as you stamp one down, you see there's some extra time spent in drawing a little cast shadow. Maybe we'll blur it a little bit more, a little bit less on the offset. And then we'll actually draw a single brush stroke like that. Let me restore the image. So as we're drawing this, it's going to add this shadow drop. But what's significant is that it's doing this shadow drop afterwards, after it's drawn everything. So it's not going to do shadow drop on top of itself. You notice that here? If I go something like this here, you might say, well, that looks good because we have a shadow drop from the leaves to the wall behind it. But what if I draw this over itself a few times? Shouldn't we also see some of these leaves cast a shadow onto the leaves below? And it doesn't do that, right? It's a single pass post effect on the entire current image. And so what we have instead is the ability to bake that shadow right into the brush image itself. When you look at this here, there is no shadow in here, right? Right now it's a post effect that the brush mechanism or the brush code is adding after we are done with the brush stroke. And what we can do instead, what I'm saying is that we can actually force that shadow to be baked into this image, make the image a little bit bigger if necessary to accommodate the extra space needed. And that's easily done. If you look under the brush options here, you'll see that there is a couple of features here. There's one called drop shadow. Right, and so when you do a drop shadow, you bake that straight into the image. It's showing you a preview here. You can give it a bit more fuzzy, and of course, if you make it fuzzy, it needs more space to hold it. So the overall preview here looks a little bit smaller. That's because the image actually gets bigger, but it gets squeezed into the same fixed size for the preview thumbnail. But anyway, so if you see the fuzziness very low, you'll see a very short amount of shadow here. So that's one place where you can play with. And what I'll do is I'll apply that, and so now I have a first shadow drop, and then there's a second one still happening, right? You see it already here, and then there's a second one getting even darker because we still have that post effects. If I disable it though, we just have this one shadow that's now baked into the brush. It's not in the stored brush, right? If I want to see it in the stored brush, I need to store it again. That's the one I've modified. Now we see it. And now we see that there is a bit of a darkening, shaded, sort of a shadow drop on that one. I can paint with this one without the shadow drop. I can paint with this one, and this one is doing the shadow on every single dab. Every single stamp has it, and that's why it looks even more realistic if you go something. Let's say we increase the drop here, the step. So as you do this, every one of these is adding that darkening shadow. Do you see the difference now? All right, so here it is. Let's do a quick summary. You have before and after, right? This one here is with the shadow only added. Let's make sure we have a decent step here, about 150. So we have this one here is without shadow, and then we still use that same one, but again still with a step distance of about 150 or so, but this time with the shadow drop. So this one here is a shadow drop after the fact at the end, and we notice particularly if I do sort of a plaster it all over like this, you won't see any shadows on here. Just a few places where it's a little bit a little hole you can see through this one and this one. Most of it is going to be the shadow around it, right? And now we have, ta-da, this one with again a step of maybe 150 or so. This one is going to show the shadow added on every single dab. Now this was a single image, right? Wouldn't it be nice if we could actually do the same thing with this? This, remember, is the particle brush, excuse me, the animated brush containing 3 images. And in fact we can. So we can select this guy and we can go drop shadow, and we just see one preview here, the first frame, but it is going to apply it to every single frame. Let's give it a little bit less on the opacity. Let's OK that. And we won't see it here. Again, we will see it in the current active brush. We need to store it. So let's go store the current brush. And now open the film strip for that one. And it's subtle, and maybe you can see it. If you compare this image to this one, you notice this one's a little bit smaller because it's a fixed size preview of a larger image. Why is it larger? Well, because it needed some extra space to accommodate that fuzzy shadow. And so each of these have the shadow added, and that makes for a more realistic brush here, even more before than with just one image. Of course, we still need to control the step distance. Let's give it something like this. But here it is. You basically, and we can turn off this shadow to post effect, which we don't need at this time anymore. Let's give the distance about 80 or 100 or something like that. And so now if we bring back the original image, and let's say you want to draw something like going up here, you notice that the leaves are each drawing their own shadow right on, and you can go over that and basically have that nice little soft shaded darkening appearing there too. Now there's another thing that we typically want to do with brushes like these, and that's to have them go smaller and smaller as they progress through this. Right now in PD Howler and in PD Artist 10, there is a new feature which allows you, and I'll cover that in a separate tutorial, but it allows you to create sort of a transition of the scale. You can change the size from the beginning to the end of your brushstroke. We can't do that here in PD Particles. This version does not have that. This is Particles 9, and so. But there is a way to do something similar if you have a whole bunch more of these images. Right? We have only 3 images here, but let's say you had an image sequence of, I don't know, 10 or 20 of them. What you could do is create an animated sequence of 20 frames and then simply make it scale smaller, right? But you'd have to be very careful not to draw anymore once you've reached the last small one. So that's not a very ideal situation. I would recommend, if you need these brushes to get gradually smaller and automatically, so you would probably want to go with PD Artist at the least, or PD Howler if you want more sophistication on animation as well. But let's take a look at just where would you go if you wanted to create that animated brush. Right, so in the brush menu, you'll notice that we don't have the option for creating animated brushes right in here, and that basically means we can't do that. All right, so I think I'm going to stop at this time. We can't do it in PD Particles, that is. We do store brush. You can gradually build up a sequence of images into a frame, into an animated brush. Right, we have 3 of those here. We can go and perhaps find some more, and let's say we want 1 or 2 more that are a little bit on the reddish side, like this one here. So once again, just to wrap it up, we should be able to do this, our eyes closed now, right? We've done this a few times, and hit enter will do nothing here. This goes into the transform tool. Let's apply or cancel this transform and simply pick this up as a custom brush. So where do we have that again? Pick up selected, and then add frame, and there is this one, right? And let's just do one more. This time I'll actually grab a whole bunch of these, some blob of leaves of different color here. So let's go to the lasso tool one last time, select this and something like this, and there you go. And then, yeah, and by the way, this is a crisp selection, right? And if you needed that to be a bit more blurry or soft, you can certainly do that. Go to the selection menu, and in the selection options here, you'll see there's tools like blur, or adjust and shrink and grow. So there's a couple of ways to work with that selection mask here. I'm going to blur it a little bit. It's using a Gaussian blur, and this one is going to be just a tiny little bit of blur. Let's do a precise, okay, that. And then still the same tool to pick it up. Brush, where's my brush menu there? Pick up the selected and then add it right here. So now we have a 5th image. It's a little bit blurry on the edges for its transparency, but it's still a good image to use. And we can still paint with that. But keep in mind that only 3 of these images currently have the drop shadow. That's okay. We can, we can redo this, and we can in fact add the drop shadow to this one. Let's do that. It doesn't hurt to practice more than once. Let's go drop shadow right here, and this time we'll do less fuzziness and a little bit more opaque, a little bit darker basically. You can also allow enlarged. So here's what happens by default. Right now this was checked, so that's why the the images got larger, but they appear small. The brush content appears smaller because it needs that extra space to accommodate the presence of the shadow. So that's why that's with this checked, right? If you don't check this, the images will remain the same, and then the shadow might be cut off or clipped off if you had the fuzziness too high. I tend to like the idea of seeing the entire shadow, so I'm going to keep it there. Replace colors in brush. That's also something that it might do, by default. But you could possibly have a slightly different effect that you like. Try both options. The color of the shadow, maybe you don't need it too dark, maybe a little bit more on the dark grayish, or even a slightly bluish tint if you are going to use this in a rendering that plays, or maybe a reddish if it's somewhere sunset or desert view, or like I said, a bluish tint a little bit. If you are planning to have that shadow painted, these leaves painted in an environment where there is a surrounding blue sky, and so there is some ambient coloring as well. So we have this shadow here, and we are going to store this image or this brush as well, and compare one last time. Show the film strip. There it is. So now we have even more images. We can set the step distance to something meaningful like 80-ish, and you can see how this is going to be a much more useful brush to work with. Now, one thing you want to always do when you work with these brushes is to store it so you don't lose it, right? You can save it. That will just save the image. If it's an image sequence, that's not going to be perfect, right? You want the whole image sequence. So one thing you should do is really store it. You should store this, and that will show it to you here with the film strip and everything. But then there's also the ability to put it into what we call the media collection, right? So there's a whole media collection in PD Artist or PD Howler. It's at the top near the tools, or in the toolbar. In PD Particles, we have it down here at the bottom. There's a couple of shortcuts to some of the categories, and you have the browse option. So when you click on that, that's when you get your media browser. And the first thing you should really do as you start playing with your own brushes is create your own category, right? Perhaps your initials, right? So let's create a folder here, and I'm going to call my initials here. No, that's not Photoshop, that's Philipp Steiger. and I'm going to go save my current media here, and I say 5 leaves and shadow, right? Something like that. And so now we have that. We can always click that to pick it back, and you see it has the whole collection of brushes. You can dump these. You can go back to this here and find it. You may be on some other brushes at some point, but then later come back to your own and happily pick this one again. All right, so that's the first quick intro to working with brushes. There's a bunch of other ideas I want to pursue, especially what do we do once we have these animated brushes or soft shadow brushes. Let's see some examples where we can use that to create some interesting art. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.